The sudden silence at the picnic table cut deeper than any shout. Martha, with a faint, dismissive smile, had just recounted my little setback to her colleagues, implying I lacked commitment. Faces turned. Curious. I felt the summer sun burn my bare shoulders, exposed and utterly alone. Some people, Martha had purred, just aren't built for the big leagues. The rhythmic patter of rain against the window pane had finally settled into a steady drone, a sound Clara had come to associate with quiet evenings. The air in the kitchen carried the faint, comforting scent of chamomile tea. Still warm in her mug, she had watched the last of the streetlights come on through the kitchen window, the orange glow reflecting off the wet pavement. It was past 9. Martha was out for a late business meeting, something about a new regional account. And Noah, Martha's son, was off with his friends. The sound of his old sedan fading down the street hours ago. The house, usually a constant hum of two other lives, was Clara's, a rare moment of peace she savored like the last bite of a good meal. She took her mug to the bathroom, the steam from the hot water already fogging the mirror. Lavender-scented bubbles filled the tub as Clara eased herself into the warmth, the water rising to her collarbones. The week's tension, a tight knot between her shoulder blades, began to loosen. She closed her eyes, listening to the rain, the only sound for what felt like a long time. Then, a sound broke the stillness. Hesitant footsteps, light but distinct, moved down the hallway, stopping just outside the bathroom door. Clara froze, her muscles tensing again, the warmth of the water suddenly feeling less comforting. Her mind raced, sifting through possibilities. "Martha," Clara called out, her voice a little louder than she intended, echoing slightly in the tiled room. There was no answer, just a drawn-out silence. The door creaked open a fraction of an inch, revealing a sliver of the dimly lit hallway. A shadow stood backlit in the opening, indistinct against the muted light from the living room. Clara held her breath, unable to move. "Clara!" "Oh God, I'm sorry." Noah's voice cracked, sharp with immediate panic. The door slammed shut with a muffled thud, his footsteps retreating rapidly. A clumsy, embarrassed scramble down the hallway and into the living room. Clara's heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. She grabbed the thick bath towel, wrapping it tight around her, the rough cotton abrasive against her damp skin. Her feet found the cold tile floor. She moved quickly, pulling on a robe, and walked down the short hall to the living room. Noah was on the couch, face buried in his hands, his shoulders hunched. Maisie, the tabby cat, observed the scene from the armrest, her tail twitching slowly, her green eyes unblinking. "Noah, what just happened?" Clara asked, her voice softer than she intended, trying to inject some calm into the air. He lifted his head, his face a bright crimson. I thought you were Martha," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, settling anywhere but on Clara. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Clara interrupted, though her own cheeks burned with a sudden heat. "Honest mistake. Let's just forget about it, all right?" She tried for a casual tone, though the lingering awkwardness felt heavy in the room. He nodded, his gaze dropping back to his hands. The next morning, a heavy silence hung between them at the breakfast table. Noah was unusually quiet, his eyes fixed on his cereal bowl, avoiding Clara's gaze. The clinking of spoons against ceramic was the loudest sound. He mumbled a quick goodbye before heading out for school. Later that afternoon, Clara baked a lasagna, the familiar kitchen activity a distraction. She left a large piece on the counter for Noah, knowing he would be home before Martha. When he came in, she called out from the living room, "Thought someone has to feed you." Noah managed a small, fleeting smile as he picked up the plate. "Thanks for everything, Clara," Noah said, his tone low, almost a whisper, as he passed through the living room on his way upstairs. "You've been more understanding than most people." He didn't elaborate, but the sincerity in his voice was clear. Later that night, long after Martha had returned and settled into her home office, Clara heard a soft knock on her bedroom door. She opened it to find Noah standing in the hall, his hands shoved into his pockets. The hallway light cast shadows across his face, making him look younger, more vulnerable. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Clara nodded, stepping aside. He walked in, not sitting, but just standing near the dresser, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. "I don't know where I belong," he started, his voice thick with a quiet despair. "Or what I'm supposed to do." Clara looked at him, at the uncertain set of his jaw, the worry in his eyes. "You're not alone, Noah," she said, her voice steady and quiet. "I'm here for you, always." The morning light, pale and diffuse, filtered into the living room, dusting the edges of the furniture. Clara sat in her usual armchair, a book resting open in her lap, but her eyes weren't tracing the lines of text. Instead, her thoughts replayed the previous night. Noah's hunched shoulders, the vulnerability in his voice. The memory left a quiet ache behind her ribs, a sensation she couldn't quite place. Noah appeared a few minutes later, descending the stairs, his dark hair still tousled from sleep. He stopped at the archway, a shy smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice a little rough. "Slept okay?" Clara asked, closing her book and setting it on the small table beside her. He nodded. "Better than I have in a while." Actually, he moved to the couch, sitting across from her, his posture still a little awkward. He cleared his throat. "About last night," he started, his gaze flickering to the window then back to her. Clara cut him off gently. "Sometimes we all just need someone to talk to, that's all it was." The words were meant to ease him, to smooth over the lingering discomfort of his confession. "Thanks for listening," Noah said, his voice soft. He picked at a loose thread on the couch cushion. "I don't really have anyone else I can be that open with." A small, sharp pang tightened in Clara's chest, a sudden awareness of his isolation, a protective instinct she hadn't felt in years. She watched him for a moment, the way his jaw worked, and decided to shift the air between them. "You hungry?" she asked, rising from her chair. "How about we cook dinner tonight? Something simple." He looked up, a faint smile spreading across his face. "Me cook? Don't blame me if I ruin everything." The lightness in his tone was a welcome change. They spent the late afternoon in the kitchen. Clara guided him through chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, the rhythmic thud of the knife against the cutting board filling the space. Noah's attempts at peeling garlic cloves were clumsy, leading to several small laughs as bits of skin flew across the counter. The kitchen slowly filled with the warm, savory smells of ginger and soy sauce, a scent that settled comfortably into the usually quiet room. "Not bad for a rookie," Clara teased, nudging him lightly with her elbow as he stirred the vegetables in the pan. He grinned back, a genuine, easy smile that transformed his face. "You're not so bad yourself, Chef Clara." Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about movies, about Clara's childhood growing up in a small town 2 states over, even about Maisie's peculiar habit of stealing socks from the laundry basket. Laughter, something usually rare in the house, filled the room. A light, almost fragile sound that made the evening feel different. Then, the conversation shifted, prompted by a question from Clara about his classes. Noah opened up about school, about feeling out of place, struggling to find a solid group of friends. His fork pushed at a stray piece of broccoli on his plate, his gaze distant. Clara listened intently, the clinking of cutlery. The only sound for a moment, she could see the honest weight of his words in the slump of his shoulders. "You're an amazing person, Noah," she said, her voice earnest and steady. "Anyone who doesn't see that isn't worth your time." The words felt simple, direct, meant to be grounding. He looked at her then, his expression softening, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. "You always know exactly what to say." Clara's breath caught, a brief, surprising physical reaction, but she brushed it off, picking up her water glass, the gesture a small act of control. That night, lying in her bed, Clara felt a warmth spread through her, something she hadn't felt in years. It was a quiet, unspoken connection with Noah, a feeling of shared space and understanding that settled deep within her. Yet, a flicker of unease persisted, a nagging voice reminding her of boundaries, of unspoken rules. She reached out, stroking Maisie, who had curled up at the foot of her bed. "What do you think, Maisie?" she murmured, the cat purring softly in response. Martha's business trips grew more frequent, the regional account demanding more of her time and presence. This left Clara and Noah as the quiet, consistent anchors of the house. Clara started noticing the way Noah looked at her. A gaze that would linger a beat too long sometimes, a soft intensity in his eyes. When it happened, a confusing warmth would spread through her. A strange, unsettling sensation. Noah's compliments began to change, subtle at first, then growing bolder, delivered with a directness that made Clara's stomach flutter. It wasn't just the words, but the way he held her gaze, a quiet intensity in his eyes. He'd comment on her dress, or the way her hair caught the light. "You look really good today, Clara," he'd say. And the simple words, delivered with a confident, knowing smile, would send a confusing mix of alarm and something else. Something warm and unsettling, through her. Clara felt the invisible line, the one that clearly separated aunt from nephew, blurring, almost dissolving. Her internal resistance, ingrained from years of understanding familial boundaries, battled a burgeoning, unsettling awareness. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, knowing it was wrong, yet unable to look away. One evening, after Martha had called to say her flight was delayed again, they found themselves staying up late. Noah pulled out old photo albums from the attic, dusty things filled with sepia-toned images of Martha as a child, of Clara's own youth. They sat side by side on the living room rug, talking about their pasts, the conversation flowing with an unusual intimacy. He asked about her dreams before she had moved in, about lost loves, about her quiet regrets. Clara found herself answering, revealing parts of herself she rarely showed anyone. A bottle of cheap Merlot, half empty, stood on the coffee table between them. The conversation had dwindled to a comfortable silence, the only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator. Noah shifted, turning to face her fully. His hand moved, slowly, deliberately, finding hers where it rested on a faded photograph. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a feather-light touch. "Clara," he whispered, his voice rough, thick with something unsaid. Their eyes met in the dim light of the living room. In that charged moment, Clara felt herself drawn in, a strong, almost physical pull that erased everything else. The world outside the room receded, leaving only the two of them, the quiet tension humming between their bodies. He leaned in, slowly, and their lips met. It was hesitant, a forbidden kiss that tasted of cheap wine, and the unspoken longing that had been building between them. It was soft, searching, and utterly disorienting. Clara pulled back almost immediately, a jolt of shock and shame coursing through her veins. Her breath hitched. "Noah, we can't," she whispered, the words barely audible, her voice thin with a sudden panic. He looked devastated, his hand still covering hers, his thumb still stroking. But beneath the devastation, there was a desperate yearning in his eyes, a raw, exposed emotion. I feel so much when I'm with you," he confessed, his voice trembling slightly. They both pretended it hadn't happened. They finished the album in silence, then put it away. They said goodnight, their voices stiff, unnatural. But the air between them was thick, heavy with the weight of the moment, a secret now shared, unspoken but deeply felt. Clara was consumed by guilt. It gnawed at her, a cold knot in her stomach that tightened with every passing hour. The fear of discovery, of Martha finding out, felt like a constant shadow. Every interaction with Noah, even the most mundane, felt tainted, laden with the memory of that kiss. She tried to act normal, to project an easy calm, but her body felt rigid, her movements forced. Martha called the next day, cheerful and oblivious, talking about her successful meetings and her rescheduled flight home. Clara's voice felt strained as she reassured her sister that everything was fine, that she and Noah were doing well. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Noah, sensing Clara's withdrawal, became more attentive. He'd appear at her door with a cup of tea, ask if she needed anything from the store, or just sit quietly in the living room while she read. His quiet persistence, his gentle attempts to bridge the new chasm between them, felt like a dangerous pull, tempting her to revisit the forbidden space they had briefly entered. Clara caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror one evening, seeing a stranger looking back at her, someone conflicted, burdened by a terrible secret she barely understood. Her eyes looked tired, her mouth set in a thin line. The woman staring back was no longer simply Martha's sister, a quiet aunt. She was someone else now. Something else. Maisie, from her perch on the windowsill, watched them. Her green eyes, seemingly knowing, would track their movements, her head tilting slightly. A silent witness to their escalating tension, Clara started actively avoiding Noah. She retreated to her room more often, finding excuses to be elsewhere in the house, to keep a door between them. But the house was small, their lives intertwined in its narrow hallways and shared spaces. His presence, even unspoken, was inescapable. Despite Clara's attempts to pull away, to keep a careful distance, Noah's vulnerability and quiet intensity chipped away at her resolve. He would catch her eye across the room, a silent plea in his gaze that she found impossible to ignore. A shared glance, a small, knowing smile, and the invisible line would blur again. The secret they shared, that one forbidden kiss, became a volatile bond, pulling them back into stolen moments of intimacy. A hand lingered too long on her arm. A shared laugh that lasted a beat longer than it should. These moments were always followed by waves of shame that washed over Clara, leaving her cold and afraid. She found herself rationalizing, convincing herself that it was about comforting Noah, about being there for him when Martha wasn't. But deep down, in the quiet, honest part of her mind, she knew the truth was far more complicated, far more unsettling. Martha returned home from a longer trip than usual, refreshed and full of stories about the new account. She brought back a small gift for Clara, a scarf from a boutique she'd found. She seemed lighter, more energized, but Clara could see a subtle change in the house atmosphere gnawing at her. It wasn't anything Martha could pinpoint, just a faint shift in the usual rhythm, a sense of things being out of alignment. Clara and Noah's interactions were now laced with coded glances, quick, almost imperceptible looks exchanged when Martha's back was turned, whispered words, muffled by the sounds of the television or the running water, passed between them. A palpable tension hung in the air whenever the three of them were together, a silent hum that Martha almost, but not quite, noticed. Martha tried to engage Clara, asking about her day, about the novel she was reading, but Clara was withdrawn, her usual warmth replaced by a fragile defensiveness. "Just tired," she'd say, turning back to her book or excusing herself to the kitchen. Her voice felt thin, strained even to her own ears. Noah, too, became evasive. He would often disappear into his room or out with friends when Martha was around, only to reappear in the living room or kitchen when she was preoccupied, focused on her laptop or a phone call. It was a pattern Martha would later recognize. One afternoon, Martha was tidying Noah's room, a habit he usually tolerated. On his bedside table, amidst a scattering of pens and old notes, she found a small, unfamiliar trinket, a delicate silver charm, shaped like a tiny bird. It looked distinctly like Clara's, who often wore a similar one on her own chain. Martha's brow furrowed. It was insignificant, a tiny detail, yet it sparked a flicker of unease, a loose thread in an otherwise tightly woven narrative. Later, over a casual dinner, Martha held the charm in her palm. "Found this in Noah's room," she said, her voice light, but her eyes sharp on Noah. "Did you lose it, Clara?" Noah stammered, his face flushing. "Oh no, I found it outside, Mom. Just picked it up. Thought it looked nice." His lie was transparent. Clumsy. Clara kept her eyes fixed on her plate, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Martha's suspicion, once a tiny seed, began to sprout. She started observing them more closely, unseen. From the doorway of her office, she would watch them in the kitchen. She noticed the way Noah's hand would brush Clara's as they passed a bowl. The quick, almost imperceptible way Clara would flinch, a tremor of guilt, undeniable, would flash in Clara's eyes. The silence at the dinner table, once merely awkward, now felt pregnant with unspoken words. It was an electric current of deceit, crackling beneath the surface of forced normality. Martha's gaze, sharp and questioning, felt like a physical weight on Clara's back, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. The walls of their secret began to close in, shrinking the space around them. Maisie, perched on the back of the couch, would often sit by Martha, her head resting near her shoulder. The cat would occasionally glance towards Clara and Noah, her green eyes wide, as if sensing the discord, the growing tension that filled the air. Martha couldn't shake the feeling. It clung to her like the damp autumn air. Her sister, Clara, her son, Noah. Something was terribly wrong. An unspoken truth festering in the quiet corners of her own home. The little moments, the stolen glances, the evasive answers. They all added up to a weight in her stomach she couldn't ignore. She'd tried to dismiss it, to tell herself it was just her imagination, but the unease had burrowed too deep. One evening, Clara thought Martha was out for a long dinner with a client. The house was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator. She and Noah were in the kitchen, making a late-night snack. Noah, laughing at something Clara had said, had reached out, his hand gently settling on her waist, drawing her closer. Clara hadn't pulled away, a soft smile on her face, the warmth of his touch spreading through her. The sharp, sudden sound of a dropped grocery bag shattered the quiet, echoing through the tiled kitchen. A dull thud, followed by the rolling of apples across the linoleum floor. Clara froze, Noah's hand dropping from her waist as if burned, his body stiffening. Martha stood in the doorway, her face pale, the spilled groceries a chaotic mess at her feet. The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating. It pressed in on them, thicker than any sound, heavy with unspoken accusations and undeniable guilt. Clara could hear her own heart hammering against her ribs. "Martha," Clara whispered, her voice barely a breath, fragile and thin. Martha's gaze, raw with hurt and disbelief, moved from Clara's face to Noah's, then back again. Her eyes, usually so clear and direct, were clouded with a pain so profound it was almost physical. What is this?" Her voice was a low, trembling whisper, barely audible, above the ringing in Clara's ears. Noah, eyes wide with terror, tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. His betrayal was written plainly on his face, in the tight set of his jaw, the sudden pallor of his skin. "How long?" Martha asked again, her voice gaining a sharp edge, though profound sadness had replaced the initial shock. The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Clara couldn't answer. Her own guilt was a tidal wave, overwhelming her, choking the words in her throat. Her eyes welled up, blurring Martha's tear-streaked face. "I'm so sorry, Martha," was all she could manage, the words thin and useless. A scream tore from Martha's throat then, a sound of pure agony that clawed at the quiet suburban evening. "My own sister. My own son." The words were laced with a pain that ripped through Clara, tearing at her own carefully constructed facade. The confrontation escalated quickly, words exchanged like sharp knives, each one cutting deeper, tearing open years of unspoken resentment and fractured trust. Martha accused, her voice rising in pitch, her hands trembling. Clara tried to explain, to rationalize, but her words caught in her throat, sounding hollow even to herself. Noah, finally breaking down, confessed his part, his shame a heavy cloak around him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "It just happened, Mom. I swear. I didn't mean for any of it." Martha turned on Clara then, tears streaming down her face, her eyes blazing with a cold fury. "You! How could you? He's a child! My child!" The accusation was a brutal punch to Clara's gut. The weight of her betrayal crushed Clara, flattening her. The family, once her safe haven, her refuge, was splintering before her eyes, breaking into irreparable pieces. "Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold." "Get out, Clara," Martha finally said, her voice hollow, devoid of all warmth, all emotion. Her gaze was as flat and hard as stone. "I don't ever want to see you again." Clara packed a small bag, mostly clothes, a few books, her toothbrush. The silence in the house, after Martha's raw, guttural scream, was a stark, unnatural contrast to the storm raging in Clara's chest. Each item she folded felt heavy, imbued with the weight of her deceit. She left without another word, not daring to look back. The screen door clicking softly behind her, a final, definitive sound. The small Midwestern town, once a comforting embrace where everyone knew her name and her history, now felt like 1,000 judging eyes. She could feel the whispers, imagined or real, following her like shadows down the street, clinging to her like dust. Every familiar face she saw seemed to hold a flicker of recognition, quickly replaced by a cold, averted gaze. Clara found herself a small, dusty apartment on the edge of town, 3 blocks from the main square, next to the old abandoned feed mill. The unfamiliar quiet amplified her crushing loneliness and regret. The walls were thin. The floorboards creaked. At night, the distant sound of trains passing on the tracks outside town was her only company. A mournful, solitary wail. Martha, Clara knew, was heartbroken and enraged. Her reliable sister, her dependable friend, the woman she had brought into her home. It was impossible for her to reconcile that image with the woman who had betrayed her so profoundly. The years of shared history, the bonds of blood, all shattered by Clara's actions. Noah, Clara imagined, would be adrift, consumed by guilt and confusion. The fallout of his actions, their actions, would weigh heavily on his young shoulders. He was at an age where such a betrayal, such a public shaming within his own family, would leave deep, lasting scars. She pictured him losing weight, his grades slipping, the bright spark in his eyes dulled by the heavy cloak of shame. Maisie, the cat, remained in the house with Martha, a small, constant reminder of the life Clara had shattered, a living part of the home she had lost. Clara would sometimes see Maisie in her mind's eye, curled up on the couch, watching, always watching. Clara spent her days reliving every moment, every stolen glance, every whispered word, every lie she had told Martha. She understood now, with a bitter clarity, the full, uncompromising taste of moral consequence. It was a flavor that lingered, no matter what she ate or drank. Her phone remained silent. No calls from Martha, no texts from Noah. The chasm between them felt permanent, a gaping wound that would never heal. She was excised, cut out, a cancerous growth removed from the family body. She tried to pick up the pieces, finding odd jobs, cleaning houses on the outskirts of town, working nights at a diner where no one knew her story. But the heavy cloak of shame never lifted. Sleep offered little escape, her nights filled with fragmented dreams of Martha's anguished face and Noah's trembling confession. The once bright colors of her life had dulled, replaced by the muted tones of regret and sorrow. Her safe haven, Martha's house, had been a temporary illusion. Now, it was gone, replaced by a self-imposed exile, a quiet solitude she had earned. Clara understood then that some prices aren't paid in money or jail time. They are paid in the slow, agonizing erosion of trust, in the irreparable breaking of family bonds, in the quiet, ever-present weight of a guilty conscience. She occasionally saw Martha and Noah in town, from a distance, sometimes at the grocery store, sometimes at the park. Martha's face would harden, her jaw tightening, her eyes quickly averted. Noah, if he saw her, would look away even faster, his shoulders hunching, as if trying to disappear into the crowd. There was no anger now. Just a profound, chilling indifference. The story ended not with a grand resolution, not with forgiveness or redemption, but with the quiet, lingering sorrow of a broken family, a life irrevocably altered. Clara knew she had to live with her choices, the silent judgment of the town, and the heavy burden of her own conscience. Every day, for the rest of her days. The fields outside her new window stretched endlessly, fading into the horizon, mirroring the vast, empty space that now lay where her family once stood. The rain had stopped. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. Clara sat alone, the silence amplifying the weight of her choices. She had left Martha's house weeks ago, a small bag in hand, the door clicking softly behind her, sealing her out of a life she had helped build. Now, she lived in a small apartment on the edge of town, the unfamiliar quiet a constant reminder of her solitude. She saw Martha sometimes, across the aisles at the grocery store, or passing on the street. Martha's face, once open and warm, was now a mask of coldness, her eyes hardened. Noah, when their paths crossed, would quickly avert his gaze, his shoulders hunched, as if trying to disappear. The chasm between them felt permanent, a landscape of broken trust. Clara knew there would be no grand resolution, no tearful reconciliation. The family, once her refuge, was irrevocably broken. She had to live with the quiet judgment of the town, the heavy burden of her own conscience. The fields outside her window stretched endlessly, mirroring the vast, empty space that now lay where her family once stood. Some prices, she had learned, were paid not in money, but in the slow, agonizing erosion of everything that mattered.